The cleaning cart had a squeaky wheel. It was the left one in the front, and no matter how many times he oiled it, the thing kept making that high-pitched sound every time he pushed it down the hallway. After 3 years, he had learned to live with it. In a way, that squeaky wheel had become his companion during the long, quiet nights at the Whitmore Academy of Music. He was 34 years old, and this was his life now. Pushing a cart through marble hallways, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and polishing the expensive grand pianos that the students left covered in fingerprints and coffee rings. The Academy was one of the most prestigious music schools in Boston. The students who walked these halls came from wealthy families. They drove cars that cost more than he would make in 5 years. They wore clothes with brand names he couldn't pronounce. And they looked right through him like he wasn't even there. He didn't blame them, not really. To them, he was just the janitor. The guy in the gray uniform, who showed up after they left and disappeared before they arrived. He was part of the building, like the walls and the water fountains. Nobody notices the water fountain until it stops working, but he noticed them. He noticed everything. He noticed the girl with the red hair who practiced violin for 6 hours straight, her fingers bleeding by the end because she refused to stop until she got the piece perfect. He noticed the boy from New York who cried in the bathroom after his professor told him he would never make it as a composer. He noticed the way some students treated music like a job, something to get through, while others treated it like oxygen, something they couldn't live without. He understood that second group. He understood them more than they would ever know. His grandmother had been a piano player, not a famous one, not the kind who performed in concert halls or had her name in newspapers. She played in the underground jazz clubs of New Orleans, back in the 1950 seconds. Back when a black woman playing piano in those smoky rooms was both a revolution and a risk. She never made much money from it. She worked as a housekeeper during the day and played music at night. And somewhere in between, she raised a family. He grew up in rural Mississippi, in a house with a leaky roof and a piano that took up half the living room. That piano was older than his grandmother. The keys were yellow, and some of them stuck if you pressed too hard. But to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. His grandmother started teaching him when he was 5 years old. She would sit him on her lap, take his tiny hands in hers, and guide his fingers across the keys. She didn't teach him the way they taught at fancy schools. She didn't care about theory or technique or reading sheet music. She taught him to feel the music, to close his eyes and let it move through him like water through a river. Music ain't something you think, she used to say. It's something you feel. The day you start thinking too much is the day the music dies. He learned everything from her: Chopin, Debussy, Gershwin, and the old jazz standards she loved so much. He learned to play by ear, to hear a song once and recreate it from memory. By the time he was 12, he could play pieces that most students didn't attempt until college. But there was no money for formal lessons. No money for competitions or recitals, or the things that turned talented kids into professional musicians. His grandmother told him it didn't matter. The music is inside you, she said. Nobody can take that away. Not poverty, not circumstances, not nothing. You carry it with you wherever you go. She passed away when he was 19. Cancer. It happened fast, the way these things sometimes do. One day she was sitting at the piano, playing her favorite Ellington tune, and 3 months later, she was gone. He held her hand at the end, and the last thing she whispered to him was, "Keep playing, baby. Promise me. You'll keep playing." He promised. But life had other plans. After she died, everything fell apart. There was no money for the funeral, so he worked 3 jobs to pay for it. Then, the house needed repairs. Then, his mother got sick. Then the bills piled up like snow in winter, and before he knew it, 10 years had passed, and he hadn't touched a piano once. He drifted north eventually, looking for work, looking for something he couldn't name. He ended up in Boston because that's where the bus stopped when he ran out of money. He took the janitor job at the academy because it was the only place that called him back after dozens of applications. The irony wasn't lost on him. Of all the places in the world, he ended up cleaning floors at a music school. The first few months were hard. Not the work itself. He didn't mind the work. What was hard was being surrounded by music every single day and not being able to participate. He would hear students practicing through closed doors, and something inside him would ache like an old wound that never fully healed. He would see the grand pianos sitting in empty rooms, their keys gleaming under the lights, and his fingers would twitch with a longing he couldn't explain. Then one night, about 6 months into the job, something changed. It was late, past midnight. Everyone had gone home. The building was silent, except for the hum of the heating system and the distant sound of traffic outside. He was finishing up in the main recital hall, the big one with the vaulted ceiling and the crystal chandeliers. In the center of the stage sat a Steinway grand piano, 9 feet of polished black wood and perfect ivory keys. It was worth more than everything he had ever owned combined. He stood there for a long time, just looking at it. His hands were shaking. He told himself to walk away, to finish his shift and go home. But his feet wouldn't move. Before he knew what he was doing, he was sitting on the bench. The leather was cool against his legs. He placed his hands on the keys, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. It had been so long. What if he had forgotten? What if the music was gone, dried up like a riverbed in summer? He closed his eyes and thought of his grandmother. He thought of her hands on his, guiding him through his first scales. He thought of her voice, warm and steady, telling him to feel, not think. And then he began to play. It started slow, hesitant, like a conversation with an old friend you haven't seen in years. But within minutes, it all came flooding back. His fingers remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The music poured out of him like it had been trapped inside, waiting for this moment, waiting to be free. He played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, then Debussy's Clair de Lune, then a jazz improvisation that his grandmother used to play on Sunday mornings while the coffee brewed and the sun came through the kitchen window. He played for 2 hours straight, tears streaming down his face, and when he finally stopped, his hands were trembling and his heart was full in a way it hadn't been in years. From that night on, it became his secret ritual. Every night, after everyone left, he would sit at that piano and play. He never told anyone. Who would he tell? Who would believe that the janitor, the invisible man with the squeaky cart, could play like that? So he kept it hidden. His own private world. The one place where he wasn't invisible. The one place where he was exactly who he was meant to be. He had no idea that everything was about to change. The director of the Whitmore Academy was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair she always wore in a tight bun and glasses that sat on the tip of her nose like they were afraid to commit. She had been running the academy for 22 years, and in that time, she had built a reputation for being impossible to impress. Students called her the Ice Queen behind her back, though never to her face. She had heard virtuosos from around the world audition for her program. She had trained pianists who went on to play at Carnegie Hall. She thought she had seen everything there was to see when it came to musical talent. She was wrong. It was a Thursday night in late November. The kind of cold, wet night that makes you want to stay inside with a cup of tea and a good book. She had stayed late at the academy to finish some paperwork, budget reviews, and donor correspondence, and all the tedious things that came with running an institution like this. By the time she looked up from her desk, it was almost 11 o'clock. She gathered her things, put on her coat, and was halfway to the door when she realized she had left her reading glasses on her desk. She was blind without them, couldn't even read her phone, so she turned around and walked back through the empty hallways to retrieve them. That's when she heard it. At first, she thought she was imagining things. Music, floating through the darkness, so faint she could barely make it out. She stopped walking and listened. It was coming from the main recital hall, the one with the Steinway grand that cost more than most people's houses. Her first thought was that a student had snuck in after hours. It happened sometimes. The dedicated ones, the ones who couldn't get enough practice time during the day, would find ways to slip past security and play through the night. She had caught a few over the years. Usually, she was annoyed. Tonight, she was curious. Because whoever was playing was good. Really good. She walked toward the recital hall, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The music grew louder with each step. It was Rachmaninoff, she realized. The piano concerto. No, two. One of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire. Most of her advanced students struggled with it. Whoever was playing made it sound effortless. She reached the door to the recital hall and pushed it open just a crack. Just enough to see inside without being noticed. The hall was dark, except for a single light over the stage, casting a warm glow on the piano and the person sitting at it. She squinted, trying to make out who it was. And then her heart stopped. It was the janitor, the quiet man with the cleaning cart. The one who had worked here for 3 years and never said more than "good evening" when they passed in the hallways. He was still wearing his gray uniform, his work boots, his name tag clipped to his chest. And he was playing Rachmaninoff, like he had been born to do it. She stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. She had spent her entire career around musicians. She knew the difference between someone who was technically skilled and someone who had genuine artistry. Technical skill could be taught. Artistry was something else entirely. It was rare. It was precious. And this man, this janitor, had it in abundance. His hands moved across the keys with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural. But it wasn't just his technique that stunned her. It was the emotion. He played like the music was being pulled from somewhere deep inside him. Somewhere most people never access. There was pain in it, and longing, and something that felt like hope fighting its way through darkness. She didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her cheeks. The piece ended. The last notes hung in the air like smoke, slowly dissolving into silence. He sat there for a moment, his hands still on the keys, his head bowed. Then, he took a deep breath and stood up. That's when she stepped into the light. He saw her immediately. His whole body went rigid, like a deer caught in headlights. She could see the fear in his eyes, the expectation of punishment. He probably thought she was going to fire him on the spot. Instead, she walked down the aisle toward the stage, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall. She climbed the 3 steps to the stage and stood in front of him. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "How long have you been playing?" she asked. Her voice was softer than she intended. He swallowed hard. "Since I was 5. Where did you study?" He finally looked up at her. There was something in his face she couldn't quite read. Shame, maybe. Or defiance. Or both. "My grandmother's living room," he said. She let that sink in. No conservatory. No formal training. No teachers with fancy degrees and international reputations. Just a grandmother in a living room, passing down something precious to a child who had the ears to receive it. "What's your name?" she asked, even though she knew it. She had seen it on his uniform 100 times, but never really registered it. He told her. She nodded slowly. "I've been running this academy for over 2 decades. I've heard thousands of auditions. Students from Juilliard, from the Royal Academy, from every prestigious program in the world." She paused. "I have never, in all my years, heard anyone play like you just did." He didn't say anything. He looked like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "The Winter Gala is in 6 weeks," she continued. "It's our biggest event of the year. Donors, critics, everyone who matters in the Boston music scene will be there. We had a student scheduled to perform, one of our best. He injured his hand last week. Tendinitis. He can't play." Tend. She watched his face as the implication sank in. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No, I can't do that." Why not? Because look at me. He gestured at his uniform, his work boots, the mop and bucket he had left by the door. I'm a janitor. Those people, they're not going to want to hear me play. They'll laugh me off the stage. Maybe, she said. Or maybe they'll hear what I just heard. Maybe they'll realize that talent doesn't care about uniforms or job titles or where you come from. He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him wrestling with something, some internal battle. She couldn't fully understand. I don't have anything to wear, he finally said. It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. I'll take care of that. I haven't performed in front of anyone in years. I don't even know if I can. You were performing just now. You just didn't know anyone was watching. He let out a shaky breath. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. She thought about the question for a moment before answering. Because I got into this job to find people like you. People who have something real to say through their music. And somewhere along the way, I got buried in paperwork and politics and forgot what that felt like. She paused. Hearing you play just now reminded me. So maybe you don't owe me anything. But I owe you a thank you. And I owe you an opportunity. He stood there, looking at the piano, looking at her, looking at his own hands like he wasn't sure they belonged to him. 6 weeks, he said quietly. 6 weeks. He closed his eyes. She could see him making the decision. Could see the exact moment he chose to step off the cliff and hope there was something to catch him. Okay, he said. I'll do it. She smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt on her face in months. Good, she said. We start tomorrow night, after your shift. And one more thing. See, Irma. See. What? Don't tell anyone. Not yet. Let's keep this between us until the night of the gala. He nodded. He looked terrified and exhilarated, and like he might throw up at any second. She understood the feeling. She felt it too. Something extraordinary was about to happen. She could feel it in her bones. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of his life. Harder than working 3 jobs after his grandmother died. Harder than watching his dreams slip away, year after year. Because this time, he had something to lose. This time, he had hope. And hope, he was learning, was the most dangerous thing of all. Every night, after finishing his cleaning shift, he would make his way to the recital hall where the director was waiting. She had cleared her evenings for him, canceled dinners and meetings and all the things that usually filled her schedule. When he asked her why she was doing this, why she was giving up so much of her time for someone like him, she just shook her head and said, "Because this matters." And I had forgotten what that felt like. 2. The first few sessions were rough. He could play beautifully when he was alone, when there was no pressure, when the music was just between him and the piano. But the moment she sat down in the audience to listen, something changed. His hands would tense up. His breathing would get shallow. He would hit wrong notes, lose his place. Forget passages he had known by heart for 20 years. You're thinking too much, she told him, after one particularly frustrating night. You're so worried about making mistakes that you're not letting yourself feel anything. Easy for you to say, he muttered. You're not the one who's going to be standing up there in front of all those people. She leaned forward in her seat. Let me tell you something. I was a performer once. A long time ago. Before I became an administrator, I played at some of the biggest concert halls in Europe. And every single time, right before I walked on stage, I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. I was convinced I was going to fail. What changed? Nothing, she said. The fear never went away. I just learned to play through it. I learned that the fear and the music could exist in the same space. You don't have to get rid of the fear. You just have to stop letting it drive. He thought about that a lot over the following days. He thought about it while he mopped floors and emptied trash cans and polished pianos that other people would play. He thought about it while he lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling of his tiny apartment, too anxious to sleep. The fear never went away. But slowly, night by night, he learned to make room for it. 2 weeks before the gala, the director brought in a tailor. A small, quiet man with a measuring tape around his neck and pins stuck in a cushion on his wrist. He measured every inch of the janitor's body, arms and shoulders and chest and legs, writing numbers in a little notebook without saying a word. "What's happening?" he asked the director after the tailor left. "You can't perform in your work uniform," she said simply. "You need a proper suit." "I can't afford a suit. Not the kind those people wear. You're not paying for it. I am." He started to protest, but she held up her hand. "This isn't charity. Consider it an investment. I'm investing in you because I believe you're worth investing in. One day, when you're successful, you can pay it forward to someone else. That's how it works." He didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever believed in him like this. Nobody except his grandmother. And she had been gone for 15 years. The suit arrived a week later. It was black, simple, elegant. When he tried it on and looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. He looked like someone who belonged on a stage. He looked like someone who mattered. But the doubt was still there, lurking in the corners of his mind, whispering things he didn't want to hear. "Who do you think you are?" the voice would say. "You're nobody. You're a janitor. Those people are going to take one look at you and laugh. You're going to humiliate yourself. You're going to prove that you never deserved this chance in the first place." The voice got louder as the gala got closer. 3 days before, he could barely eat. 2 days before, he couldn't sleep at all. The night before, he sat in his apartment with his phone in his hand, the director's number on the screen, his finger hovering over the call button. He pressed it. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong? I can't do this." The words came out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. "I thought I could, but I can't. I'm not ready. 2,000, 2,000, 2,000. I'm going to get up there and freeze. I'm going to forget everything. Those people are going to see right through me. They're going to know I don't belong." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady. "Do you remember what you told me about your grandmother?" she finally said. "About how she taught you to play?" She said music isn't something you think. It's something you feel. "Exactly. And what are you doing right now?" He closed his eyes. "Thinking. You're thinking so much that you've forgotten how to feel. You've built this moment up so big in your head that you can't see it for what it really is." "What is it?" "It's just music," she said softly. "That's all it's ever been. It's not a test. It's not a judgment. It's a gift. You have a gift. And tomorrow night, you're going to share it with a room full of people who desperately need to hear it, even if they don't know it yet." He felt something loosen in his chest. Not all the way. The fear was still there. But it wasn't the only thing anymore. "What if I fail?" he whispered. "Then you fail, and the world keeps spinning, and you wake up the next day and try again." "But I don't think you're going to fail. Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because I've been listening to you play for 6 weeks. And every single night, no matter how nervous you were, no matter how many mistakes you made, there was always a moment when you forgot I was there. A moment when it was just you and the music. And in those moments, you were extraordinary." He didn't say anything. He couldn't. "Find that moment tomorrow," she continued. "When you sit down at that piano, forget the audience, forget the critics, forget everything except the music. Play for your grandmother. Play for every night you spent alone in that recital hall, thinking nobody would ever hear you. Play for the 5-year-old boy who sat on his grandmother's lap and learned that music was magic." He took a deep breath. Then, another. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll be there. I know you will." He hung up the phone and sat there in the darkness for a long time. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there. But underneath it, he felt something else now. He felt ready. Tomorrow night, everything would change. He didn't know if it would change for better or worse. He didn't know if he would triumph or fall flat on his face. But he knew one thing for certain. He was going to walk onto that stage. He was going to sit down at that piano. And he was going to play like his life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. The night of the winter gala arrived with a cold wind and a sky full of stars. Limousines lined up outside the Whitmore Academy, one after another, their doors opening to release Boston's wealthiest and most powerful. Women in fur coats and diamond earrings, men in tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars. They climbed the stone steps and entered the grand foyer, where champagne was waiting and soft music played from hidden speakers. Inside the recital hall, every seat was filled. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting tiny rainbows on the walls. The air smelled like expensive perfume and old money. People greeted each other with air kisses and firm handshakes, talking about their recent trips to Europe, their children's accomplishments, their portfolios and properties, and all the things that mattered in their world. Backstage, in a small dressing room with a mirror and a single chair, he sat alone. The suit fit perfectly. The director had been right about that. He looked like he belonged here, at least on the outside. But inside, his stomach was in knots. His hands were shaking so badly he had to press them against his thighs to keep them still. He could hear the crowd through the walls, the murmur of hundreds of voices, and each voice felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. There was a knock on the door. The director stepped in, wearing a deep blue gown he had never seen before. She looked different tonight. Softer, somehow. Less like the Ice Queen the students whispered about and more like a person who remembered what it felt like to be scared. "It's almost time," she said. He nodded but didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could. She walked over and sat down in the chair across from him. "I want to tell you something before you go out there. Something I've never told anyone." He looked up at her. 30 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. I was about to perform at a major concert in Vienna. It was the biggest opportunity of my life, and I was so terrified that I couldn't stop shaking. She paused, her eyes distant, lost in the memory. My teacher came to see me before I went on. He was an old Russian man, very stern, never gave compliments. But that night, he took my hands in his and said something I've never forgotten. What did he say? He said, "The audience is not your enemy. They came here hoping to feel something. They want you to succeed. They are waiting for you to move them, to transport them, to make them forget their lives for a few minutes. They are on your side, even if they don't know it yet." She reached out and took his hands, just like her teacher had done for her all those years ago. Those people out there, they have everything money can buy, but most of them haven't felt truly moved by something in years. They've forgotten what it's like. Tonight, you're going to remind them, not because of who you are or where you come from, but because of what you can do, because of the gift you carry. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He blinked them back. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She squeezed his hands once, then let go. "Thank me after. Right now, you have a piano waiting for you." The walk from the dressing room to the stage felt like the longest of his life. He stood in the wings, hidden by heavy velvet curtains, and listened as the director stepped onto the stage to address the crowd. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this year's Winter Gala. As many of you know, we had a last-minute change to our program. Our scheduled performer was unable to play due to an injury. But sometimes, life gives us unexpected gifts." She paused, and he could feel her looking in his direction, even though he couldn't see her face. "Tonight's performer is someone you haven't heard of. He has no formal training, No degrees from prestigious conservatories. No awards or accolades. What he has is something far more rare. He has a gift that I have only encountered a handful of times in my career. I ask you to listen with open ears and open hearts. May I present our guest artist, Node. R. Node. There was polite applause. He heard whispers rippling through the crowd. Who was this unknown performer? What was the director thinking? He stepped out from behind the curtain. The lights were blinding at first. He couldn't see faces, just shapes in the darkness beyond the stage. He walked toward the piano, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The Steinway gleamed under the spotlight, waiting for him like an old friend. As his eyes adjusted, he started to make out the audience. And that's when he saw the expressions. Confusion. Doubt. Some people were frowning. A few were smirking. He heard someone whisper, "Isn't that the janitor?" The word spread through the room like a wave. The janitor. The cleaning man. The one who emptied their children's trash cans and mopped the floors they walked on. What was he doing up here? Was this some kind of joke? He felt his confidence wavering. The voice in his head came roaring back. They're laughing at you. They think you're a joke. You should have never agreed to this. Run. Run now before you embarrass yourself even more. But then he saw the director, standing at the side of the stage. She gave him a small nod. Just a nod. But it was enough. He sat down at the piano. The bench was cool beneath him. The keys stretched out in front of him, black and white. Waiting. He placed his hands on them and closed his eyes. He thought of his grandmother. He thought of her sitting beside him on that old piano bench in Mississippi, her hands warm on his, her voice soft in his ear. Play what you feel, baby. That's all that matters. He began to play. He had chosen Chopin's Ballade, No. 1 inch, G minor. It was a piece about longing, about loss, about the hope that survives even in the darkest places. It started soft, gentle, like a whisper in an empty room. The first notes floated out into the silence, fragile and beautiful. The whispers in the audience stopped. He played through the opening passages, his fingers finding the keys with an ease that surprised even him. The fear was still there, but it was fading, dissolving like mist in morning sun. The music was taking over. The music was becoming everything. The piece built slowly, gathering intensity, moving through passages of tenderness and passages of fire. His hands flew across the keys, not thinking, just feeling. Just letting the music pour out of him, like it had been trapped inside for years. Waiting for this moment. In the audience, something was shifting. The smirks disappeared. The frowns softened. People were leaning forward in their seats, caught by something they couldn't name. A woman in the third row pressed her hand to her heart. A man in the back row wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He didn't see any of this. His eyes were closed. He was somewhere else now. Somewhere the audience couldn't follow. He was in his grandmother's living room, 7 years old, playing while she hummed along. He was in the empty recital hall at midnight, alone with the music. Free. The piece reached its climax. A thundering cascade of notes that seemed to shake the very walls. He poured everything into it. Every late night spent scrubbing floors. Every dream he had buried. Every moment he had felt invisible, worthless, forgotten. He poured it all into the music and let it transform into something beautiful. The final chord rang out and then faded into silence. He sat there, his hands still on the keys, his head bowed. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. And then the room erupted. People were standing. People were clapping. People were cheering. The applause crashed over him like a wave, so loud and so overwhelming that he couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except sit there and try to understand what was happening. He opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. They were on their feet, All of them. Wealthy men and elegant women. Critics and donors, and people who had never noticed him before. They were standing for him. And in that moment, he finally understood what his grandmother had been trying to tell him all those years ago. The music doesn't care who you are. It only cares what you feel. And tonight, he had made them feel something they would never forget. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 10 minutes. He lost count somewhere around the 5th minute, when his legs started shaking, and he had to grip the edge of the piano bench to keep himself upright. People were shouting bravo. Some were crying openly, not bothering to hide their tears. Others just stood there, with their hands pressed together, applauding like their lives depended on it. He didn't know what to do. Nobody had ever prepared him for this. So he just stood there, next to the piano that had changed his life, and let the moment wash over him. When the applause finally began to fade, people started moving toward the stage. Not walking. Rushing. Like they were afraid he might disappear if they didn't reach him fast enough. A woman in a red dress grabbed his hand and held it between both of hers, telling him that she hadn't cried like that since her mother's funeral. A man in a gray suit pressed a business card into his palm and said something about recording contracts and concert tours. Another man, older, with kind eyes and a trembling voice, simply said thank you over and over again. The director stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She didn't push forward to claim him or take credit for discovering him. She just watched with a quiet smile on her face, like a gardener admiring a flower she had helped grow. Later that night, after the crowd had thinned and the champagne had stopped flowing, he found himself standing alone in the recital hall. The chairs were empty now. The chandeliers had been dimmed. The only sound was the soft hum of the heating system and his own breathing. He walked to the piano and sat down one more time. He didn't play anything. He just sat there, running his fingers over the keys without pressing them, feeling the smooth ivory beneath his fingertips. A door opened behind him. Footsteps approached. He didn't turn around. "I thought I might find you here." It was a young voice. He turned and saw a teenage boy standing a few feet away. He recognized him immediately. It was one of the students from the academy. A kid who had walked past him 100 times without ever making eye contact. A kid who came from money, who had been studying piano since he was 4, who had every advantage in the world. The boy looked different tonight. Smaller somehow. More human. "I've been studying piano for 12 years, the boy said. His voice cracked a little. "I practice 6 hours a day. I have the best teachers in the country. And I've never, not once, made anyone feel what you made that room feel tonight." He didn't know what to say. So he waited. "Mon, how do you do it?" the boy asked. "What's the secret?" He thought about the question for a long moment. He thought about his grandmother, about all those nights in her living room, about everything she had taught him that had nothing to do with technique or theory. "There's no secret," he finally said. "The music isn't something you perform. It's something you share. Every time I play, I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm trying to give them something. A feeling. A memory. A moment of peace." He paused. "I play for the people who never got to be heard. I play for everyone who ever felt invisible." The boy stood there, taking in the words. Something shifted in his face. A softening. An understanding. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the piano once more. The next few months passed in a blur. The performance at the Winter Gala had been recorded by someone in the audience, and the video spread across the internet like wildfire. Within a week, it had millions of views. People from all over the world were watching, commenting, sharing. News outlets picked up the story. The janitor who stunned high society. The hidden genius discovered by accident. Headlines that made him cringe, but also made him grateful. The offers came pouring in. Concert halls wanted to book him. Record labels wanted to sign him. Talk shows wanted to interview him. He said yes to some and no to others. trying to navigate a world he had never imagined being part of. His first real concert was in New York, at a famous hall he had only ever seen in pictures. He was terrified, just like he had been at the gala, but when he sat down at the piano and started to play, the fear melted away, just like it always did. The music took over, the audience disappeared, and for those precious minutes, he was exactly where he was meant to be. After the concert, a reporter asked him what it felt like to go from cleaning floors to performing on one of the most prestigious stages in the world. He thought about the question before answering. "I'm still the same person," he said. "I still remember what it feels like to be invisible. I still remember what it feels like to have dreams that seem impossible. The only difference is that now I have a chance to show people that those dreams don't have to stay impossible. That where you come from doesn't have to determine where you end up." A year after the Winter Gala, he returned to Mississippi for the first time in over a decade. He drove down the same dirt roads he had walked as a child, past the same fields and churches and broken-down houses. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. Older. More fragile. He found his grandmother's old house. It was abandoned now, falling apart, the roof caved in, and the windows shattered. He stood in what used to be the living room and looked at the spot where her piano had been. The piano was gone. Sold years ago to pay bills he hadn't been there to help with. But he could still see it. He could still hear her playing, her voice humming along, her laughter filling the room. He made a decision that day. He used the money he had earned from his concerts to buy back the piano. It took months to track it down. It had passed through several owners, ending up in a pawn shop in Memphis, dusty and forgotten. When he finally found it, he sat down and played the first song his grandmother had ever taught him. The keys still stuck in the same places. The sound was still slightly out of tune. It was perfect. Also, he had the piano restored and placed in the lobby of a new community center he helped build in his hometown. A place where kids could come after school to learn music, for free, no matter how poor their families were. He named it after his grandmother. On the opening day, a little girl walked up to the piano. She was 7 years old, with braids in her hair and holes in her sneakers. She looked at the keys like they were made of magic. "Can I touch it?" she asked. He knelt down beside her. "You can do more than touch it. You can play it. But I don't know how." He smiled. "That's okay. I'll teach you." He lifted her onto the bench, sat down beside her, and took her small hands in his. Gently, he guided her fingers to the keys. "Music isn't something you think," he said softly. "It's something you feel." She pressed down on a key. A single note rang out, clear and bright, filling the room. And somewhere, he knew, his grandmother was smiling. The world had tried to make him invisible. It had tried to convince him that people like him didn't get chances, didn't deserve dreams, didn't matter. But he had proven it wrong, not by becoming famous or wealthy, but by refusing to let go of the music that lived inside him. He still played concerts, he still traveled the world, but the moment he treasured most was that one, in a small community center in rural Mississippi, watching a little girl discover the magic of music for the first time. Because that was why he played. That was why he had always played, for the ones who never got to be heard, until now.